the Cerberus is a combined effects, distortion, tuner and IR loader. It features a digital delay, 6 different modulations, an analog distortion circuit based on an Angry Charlie, an analog drive section based on a Marshall Bluesbreaker, and full analog controls of all of the above. You can also save presets of any combination of drive, delay and modulation. In short, it's an ideal multi-effects for people that don't like screens. Hello guys, this is about the NUX Cerberus, and in the interest of full disclosure, I want to just say that NUX have sent this over to me. Now, they were originally going to send me a Bluetooth speaker of some description that you practiced at home through and you could jam onto tracks, but I said I wasn't particularly interested in that, and I was more interested in their Trident and the Cerberus because the Cerberus fit on my pedal board. And as you can see right here, because I have my pedal board, I've already Velcroed it to it. And I've even ripped the feet off the bottom of the NUX in order that it Velcros down nicely. That's because I'm going to switch to this for all of my gigs. This fulfills every need that I actually have right now, and I just find it an incredibly convenient unit. But I wanted you to know that it was me that asked them to send this over because I'm going to be very positive about this, and I don't want you to think that I'm being paid to do that, although I did obviously get the unit for free. You can see that I've paired it here, in this case, with my Barber Small Fry Burn unit. It would take a lot to usurp this from my board, but I can tell you that I can get this internal drive section to sound pretty damn similar to this. In fact, pretty similar to a lot of things. You can think of the drive in here as being 2 different things. You could either think of it as being a 200 quid pedal and a 400 quid pedal, or 2 pedals that were originally 40 quid each that gained quite the following. However you want to think of that. You've also got the NUX Atlantic delay in here, which I've already done a video on the standalone product, so I'm not going to go over that in great detail. I might give you a quick example, but I'm not going to go over every sound and every reverb in here because I've done a whole video on that already. I will give you some examples of the modulation section, including a Leslie sound that I have kind of faked by combining a chorus and a tremolo, even though that's not what you're supposed to do, but I think it gets somewhat in the ballpark. So I'll give you examples of those right now. What you're hearing, by the way, in this video is actually the Simplifier Mk2 preamp with the cab sim turned off. And this device here, the NUX, is running an impulse response, my standard impulse response. So before, I had a pedal board that featured this with a dude pedal, an EP booster, a DD3 delay, a Sonic 8 IR loader, and a TU2 tuner, which is a whole heap of things to just rewire every gig. And I had situations where I was doing a solo gig the night before, and then I would do a band gig or something in the afternoon, then a solo gig at night. And so I had to rewire the pedal board twice in the space of 24 hours. And I was thinking, well, should I buy another pedal board, another power source? Power source is 130 quid, pedal board 60 quid. These things get very expensive in a rush. But this has solved that problem, because now I can simply switch out the burn unit for this, for the two different gigs. And then just carrying this with me in the wires bag means I've got a backup rig. Now you can, and I've seen a lot of channels doing this, use this as a standalone and not bother with the preamp, but they're kind of using it wrong. The purpose of this pedal is not to be a standalone unit. I've seen this mistake so many times. Even Anderson's got this wrong. They tried the cab sim and they said, oh, it just didn't sound very good. You don't have an amp. You've got two overdrive pedals and an IR loader. So it's kind of like getting an Angry Charlie, sticking it straight into a 4x12 without an amplifier and going, well, it doesn't sound very good. Of course it doesn't sound very good. You've not got a preamp. So you have to have some kind of a preamp pedal or an amp. So what it's really designed to do is to have your drive section before an amplifier. You send it over to the amp, and then for cable method, you use the amp's effects loop. You send the signal back to this, it goes through the modulation, it goes through the delay, through the reverb, and then it goes back to the amplifier. But just as it goes back to the amplifier, the signal splits and goes into an impulse response, and that comes out of output 2, and you can then send that straight to the PA. The advantage being that that signal is then consistent, especially if you've got an amp that has a master volume. Now I don't, I've got a Plexi style amp, so it's non-master, so that signal would vary in volume slightly. But if you have any other amp in the world, you'd have a master volume, which means that whatever you do on stage doesn't affect the signal that you're sending to front of house. That is a really handy feature. But for me, I'm basically running 4-cable method using that instead of the amplifier, and thus that becomes my entire live gigging rig, which is incredibly convenient, especially for backing track stuff, which is what I'm doing a lot of. There are other handy features on here, including the control button on the end. You can use the control foot switch to operate a few different parameters, either the reverb, the mod effects, which I will explain a little bit more in just a second, the drive bypass mode, or the boost. Basically, you have two halves of the modulation block. On the one half, you have 3 different chorus options, and on the other, you have tremolo, phaser, and univibe. So you could use the control button to control the tremolo, phaser, and univibe, and then the modulation button, if you were in what you see as what you get mode, just stomp mode, controlling the chorus. Alternatively, you can go to presets, and then you can have combinations of any of these things pulled up as a preset, yet you still have analog control. It's incredibly easy to edit as well, which is something else that I like. So say you had a preset that was saved in 1B, location 1B. If you're already on it, you just hit 1B again and it goes into edit mode. Now you can use the physical buttons to just change that sound and then hit save. So it's incredibly easy to make alterations to things and to save things on the fly, even when you're using presets, which is a reason why I'm really big into this. There are no edit screens and that kind of stuff. You have a tiny screen which is just for the tuner. The tuner is easy to access. You just hold down one of the buttons and the tuner pops up. You can also use overdrive bypass for this control. Now the advantage of this is if you're in what you see is what you get mode and you're not in presets, but you want to combine both overdrives simultaneously for your main drive sound. So your amp is running clean and then you turn both of them on at the same time for your lead sound. Well, instead of having to push both of them, you can simply have both of them on the overdrive bypass. So on the bypass, they're both bypassed. And when you turn it on, you turn both of them on at the same time. That's a really handy feature, and that's probably how I would use it if I was using it for my main drive sound. Alternatively, you can have it as a boost, and you can adjust the amount of boost using the little fine potentiometer, should we say, on the back. You have MIDI control. You've got minus 10 dB for your return from your effects loop in case you're sending a lot of signal from your amp. That's pretty cool. You've got a ground lift because, of course, you're combining your amp's earthing with potentially your PA, because you could go out of the IR to the PA. So that's a really handy thing. You've also got an on-off, which I haven't been using. I've just been plugging that in. So really well thought out unit. This is something that I like the sound of a great deal, and I find incredibly convenient. It would be a backup rig. You could use it without a preamp in a pinch. You could just use the cab and you could use the pedal. I have two things that I would like to see adjusted for future iterations. I cannot imagine many people using the headphone out here. Since there's no auxiliary in, you couldn't jam along with something, which means there is limited usage for that other than just regular practice or something. And the fact that it doesn't have a preamp, I just don't see that many people would be using it in that way. You could use it with a preamp pedal, but if you're using it with an amp, then your amp is making noise. So I don't know that there's a great deal of use for that. What I would like to see is an XLR out. If you've made a device that goes straight to PA, most PAs these days have either some kind of a stage box, or it tends to only be XLR on a lot of these digital desks. So you'd have to use some kind of a DI box in order to get a jack signal into the PA. That's less than convenient. It would be better if there was an XLR out directly from this. The other thing is I would kind of like it to be a stereo out, particularly for things like recordings. I know that the Atlantic delay and reverb can be stereo because the standalone version is, and the 80s digital delay actually sounds fantastic. It's got really nice stereo spread to it. It would be really cool if I could run stereo. There's one other thing on this unit that I would like to tweak, and it's to do with the tuner. Now the tuner is good, it's very accurate, it's not skittish, but the LEDs here that illustrate whether you are higher or lower than being in tune are not terribly easy to read on a dark stage. Now under normal circumstances, these LEDs indicate the routing of the two drives. So whether you have the distortion or the drive first, and you can rearrange them by pressing this button. Now you can see by pressing that the two LEDs in the middle here have illuminated, and that means that both the distortion and the drive are now in parallel. I think that you could utilize this lower LED to make the tuner slightly easier to read on a dark stage. So I'm now zoomed out much further, and this is more representative of what you might see on a stage, although this is still much closer than the head height. So I'm going to enter tuner mode by holding down this. Okay, so now we're into the tuner, and I've detuned one of the strings on my guitar, but I'm going to show you what you would see on a dark stage, which is that. So if I now hit the string, okay, am I higher or lower than the middle? You don't know. There's no point of reference. Now obviously as you go to tune, you would likely have known that your string was sharp or flat of where it should be, but during tuning you would strike the note and you would tune up to something. Okay, so now, bearing in mind you wouldn't be able to hear this note on a stage, and am I higher or lower? I'd have to drop down. I can hear that I'm higher. That's incredibly difficult to use on a stage. So here's my thought, and I think that you could do this with a firmware update. If you could make it so that the lower LED here, which is illuminated when both the distortion and drive are in parallel, came on 100% of the time in tuner mode, it would give you a reference point for whether one of these outside LEDs was higher or lower than the center. That way you would be able to tune on a completely dark stage without actually having to tune first and simply guess which direction you've got to go. This could be done with firmware. Failing that, the only other way you could do it is to change the position of these LEDs and make them far wider so that you wouldn't need a point of reference, but that obviously means changing the hardware itself. At some point, I'm going to do a quick comparison between this and my Tech 21 fly rig because I feel like they operate in a similar space, although not the same. The form factor might be similar, but this does quite a lot of extra things that the Tech 21 doesn't do. But they are for sure comparable products. I've been using my Tech 21 now for 2 years, and I can tell you, after doing the comparison video, I'm going to sell it because this is better for me because of the IR loader. Really, that's the big deal. I would miss the really fantastic Leslie sim that is in the Tech 21, and I do find the Sounds amp quite useful for turning one amp into something else. But if you don't have need for those two things, this I think is probably a better option because it gives you a lot more options and a really, really great drive section. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Later.